Yes, I know we're a week late. Shut up about it. You join us once again for another episode of The Strange and Deadly Show. It's a podcast where we cover the Section 3 films related to the video Nasties. I'm sorry we're late, by the way, but Tom, I believe, was undergoing a sex change. How's the new vagina working out for you?
It's a lot of fun. I'm enjoying it.
Lovely. Well, I'll teach you some tips on how to use it later, but for now we must press on, my friend. My name is Chris Clayton, and I am joined by...
Tom Elliott.
Are you sure it's not Tabitha Elliott now?
I haven't quite decided yet. We'll see.
Okay, well, I can help you out with that later, but for now, my friend, well, here we are. We're on episode 9. We're one episode away from a milestone, 10 episodes. Did you believe it would last even this long, working with me?
You know, I did. Much as I get the piss taken out of me every week, you know, I knew we're gonna reach the goal. I'm confident of that.
I don't take the piss out of you every week. I take the piss out of you every other week. Don't forget, you must be accurate, but it's all done with love.
I know.
That's the main thing. That's the thing we need to take away from this. Now, of course, we've been, as I said before, we've been covering the Section 3 films, pairing up films every other week, and here we are with our 9th pairing. Tom, why don't you tell me, in fact, even though I already know, but tell everybody what we've got in store for them on this episode.
Well, last time round I said we were going to talk about a couple of vampire movies. Now, at that point, I knew Martin. Martin is very famously is it a vampire movie, you know? There is that ambiguity there. So we've all got our own opinions on that, and we will get into it later. But then I started watching Bloodlust, and I was like, I hadn't seen it. I was like, hold on a minute. I told everyone that this was a vampire movie. But I kind of got an idea why I paired it up with Martin at the after I'd seen it, and I think that's going to become apparent as we go through. So I think instead of titling this one Vampire Movies, it'll be Vampire Movies with a question mark after it.
Yeah, or vampire-ish, because it really is, you know, I think it's blurring the line just a little bit. Both of them, really. It's quite different. We're not covering traditional vampires on this show.
No, not by any means. But they do fit quite well together, and now I kind of remember why I did pair them up together. I must have read something about Bloodlust or Mosquito the Rapist, as it's sometimes known. We'll get into that later on. But yeah, they do make quite a fitting double bill, I think.
Indeed they do. A rapist mosquito, Tom, what will they think of next?
I think we can add that one to the strange and deadly list of films we'll make once we're done with the podcast.
Yeah, of stupid ideas that nobody else would ever take on except us. You're listening to that, folks, at home. The balls are gone, but the voice remains. Okay? Tom Elliott. Yes, so 2 vampire-ish films, vampire question mark. Why don't we begin with the first one, and I'm going to be presenting that to you all. It's called Bloodlust, as Tom said, also known as Mosquito the Rapist. And this is one neither Tom and I had seen before. It was released in 1977. It was directed by Marijan Vajda. I hope I've pronounced that right. He's a Croatian director, apparently. Written by him as well. Bloodlust focuses on an incredibly disturbed young man played by Werner Pokath. I'm going to pronounce it Pokath. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah.
It could be Pochath.
Pokath. Let's go with Pokath.
We'll go with Pokath, who, through flashbacks, we learn had suffered emotional and physical abuse at the hand of his alcoholic father. Not only was he beaten viciously as a teenager, he also had to bear witness to his younger sister being sexually abused by the very man supposed to raise and protect them both. Such experiences have clearly affected him in later life. Although he holds down a steady, though boring office job, his life outside of work is anything but boring. The man, who is never given a name in the movie, collects pale dolls which he keeps on shelves inside his room. He lives in a drab area with a few residents nearby, but the focus of his attention is on a young girl played by Birgit Zamalo, who does little in life except dance wistfully to music. She's protected by her mother, played by Ellen Umlauf, who recognises the attention the man pays to her daughter and believes him to be suspicious. The The man spends some of his time visiting prostitutes in a seedy area of town, but only ever pays to watch the girls interacting with each other. Life for him seems generally meaningless until he comes upon an idea to enter local morgues. It's in these morgues that his fascination with the human body grows, as he begins to focus on female bodies and slices off body parts so that he can lick the blood oozing from the wounds and cuts. It's not long before the authorities begin to investigate and the local papers are writing stories talking about a vampire amidst their number. Nevertheless, the man continues to mutilate bodies, now adding in a twin-pronged straw-like device to puncture their flesh so that he may suck up the blood. The man's sanity takes an even greater hit when the young girl who he so deeply admires from afar falls from a nearby roof, dying instantly when she plummets to the ground. With the man's insatiable lust for blood seemingly unabated despite his grief, will the authorities be able to find him before he finds another body, or worse, takes one of the living with him? It may just be that his need to feed will ultimately be the undoing of him.
I only managed to peek into his room once. Very peculiar. The walls are all black. You know him. He's got the whole room full of dolls. What do you suppose he uses them for? Huh?
Maybe he collects them as a hobby.
He is kind, pleasant, polite. Funny. Maybe it's because he can't talk or hear anything. I think he's in love with you.
In love. In love? I'm in love with the clouds. One of these days I'm gonna dance over the rooftops and caress the whole world.
Here. You're a silly little dreamer. Well, you like it?
It's wonderful.
I want you to keep out of his way. I don't trust him.
So, Tom, it's a film that neither of us had seen before. What did you think of Bloodlust, aka Mosquito the Rapist?
Well, Chris, we've both gone on record before saying we like the kind of slice of life maniac films. Maniac being the sort of big one for us both. We both loved that film, and we've both acknowledged that not that much happens in it, but we enjoy spending that time with a maniac and seeing how his mind works and what he gets up to on a day-to-day basis. So in a lot of ways this should be right down my alley, both of our alleys. So I just felt there was something missing from it that really made me appreciate it on that level. I mean, we'll get into the fine details later on. I just think that I don't dislike it, but I didn't really get him as such. You know, I understand he had this terrible past and everything, why he does what he does. But then the film just settles into quite a repetitive second half, maybe, where he goes to the morgue, he mutilates a body, he leaves. He goes to the morgue, he mutilates a body, he leaves. You know, rinse and repeat, and then it ends. But I just never really found him as fascinating as the likes of Joe Spinell in Maniac, the likes of the guy who played Harry in Christmas Evil. He just never really had that magnetism for me, and that's not to say he was completely bereft of it. And again, we'll speak about him in particular, I think a bit later on. But as for general thoughts go, I didn't dislike it. I thought it was okay, but for something that should be right down my alley, I just don't think it quite hit the mark. So what about you?
You know, Tom, I love it when we agree with each other. In this case, we absolutely do. I feel very, very similarly to yourself. I think I probably dislike it a little bit more than you do, but I don't dislike it in general. I found it to be quite boring.
Yeah,
I have to say. I thought the pace of it was glacial, and it stayed that way through the whole thing. It never really, I don't know if you noticed that, it's sort of, the pace of it doesn't really speed up or slow down. It just kind of stays at the same level through the whole thing.
Yeah.
Quite repetitive, as you say. The film has a very dreamlike quality to it, I think.
At times, yeah.
Yeah, I think especially with the character of first of all, nobody in the film actually has a name. So that's the first thing we need to know. None of the characters, and I made a point of looking it up afterwards in case I'd missed it. And indeed, there are only 3 characters who are really focused upon to any great degree, and that is of course our main man here, played by Werner Pokath, and the young girl who he admires, who spends the entire film. Well, to say the entire film, she's gone at some point about halfway through, or 3/4 of the way through. But she spends most of her time dancing to music, whether it exists or not. She's dancing to it, so she doesn't do very much and doesn't have very much dialogue. And then there's the mother of the girl. So those are basically the 3 main characters, if you like. But the bulk of it is spent. We're spending time with this guy. He's a strange guy, deranged, and of course, the theme on this episode is vampire. Now, I've got this in the trivia section. Before I sort of get even more into our general opinion on things and go through some of the plot, I thought I might bring this in now because it's something that I didn't actually learn until after I'd seen the movie, and it did help me to understand some of it a little better. So in the trivia section I've got here, so some information that I found. The film is based on a real-life murderer named Kuno Hoffmann, who, in the early 70s in Germany, committed very similar acts upon female corpses and also murdered 3 people. Hoffmann had experienced very similar abuse at the hands of his father as a child and had grown up with perversions similar to the one the main character has in Bloodlust. One crucial difference is that Hoffmann did indeed engage in necrophilia, sexually molesting the female bodies he mutilated. He was caught in 1972 and sentenced to life in prison. He came to be known as the Vampire of Nuremberg, and that was actually a sort of subtitle that was given to this film when it was released in America. It was called Bloodlust, the Vampire of Nuremberg. So what we're seeing here is very much a sort of a recount of that story with some changes here and there. I have to say, it's not a biopic by any means, but as something that's inspired by that story, I didn't find it that interesting. I have to say, I found it slow. I thought the guy Werner Pokath I thought was suitably creepy in the role.
Yeah.
As a character, he is, as quote unquote, deaf and dumb. It's not a term I've ever liked, to be honest, but he's mute, so he never speaks a line of dialogue in the whole thing.
That's right.
And I think in a way that's a detriment to it, because it has to then be a very physical role. We have to see the expressions on his face and everything, and it's fine, but there's nothing that lifts it for me from being just quite drab throughout the whole thing.
Maybe if he had have spoke, maybe if there was a bit more to him, he would have had a bit more of that magnetism, because he does have a very, I guess we'll speak about him at the moment. He does have a very unique look to him. He has a very haunted look about him. In some ways, I did find him very convincing. Like I say, there was nothing that really drew me to him. That magnetism that Joe Spinell had, that the chap who played Harry, who I can't remember the name of, had in Christmas Evil. These psychos that we love to sit and study. He just never had that spark.
No, and also there really was. I mean, obviously we now know that this was based on a particular killer, but to me that doesn't really matter that it happened to be inspired by somebody. I do feel like we needed something that showed us why he does the things he does. I mean, collecting the dolls, for example. We get a flashback very early on in the movie where we see him as a teenager being beaten by his father, who's an alcoholic, and his father then basically beats him to the ground, kicks him. His younger sister comes in, and he begins to kind of begin to sexually molest her, and then stops. Doesn't do it. He's just drunk. He's obviously a horrible man, and we infer from this that this must have been what pushed him to this point. But there's never. It seems to be quite a quick transition from I'm a creepy guy living on my own collecting dolls to I'm going to go into morgues and just cut people up.
That's right. I think. Don't get me wrong, I don't need all the dots to be sort of joined, but I think we needed a bit more with this one. I mean, those scenes, it's quite funny actually, that we go into these flashback sequences, and I think they're quite clumsily handled, the way it's edited in, because there's this scene of I think he's a guy who he lives near, beating up another guy in a really clumsy and unconvincing way. Then we go to, it just sort of cuts to his flashback of him getting beaten up by his dad in a really clumsy and unconvincing way. And the only disturbing thing about it I found was, when the young girl comes in and he starts to lift up her dress, no one wants to see that. So unless you're a total creep, then it is disturbing, even if it's not particularly well done. So, yeah, we know his past, but we just needed a bit more connective tissue there, I think.
With Harry and with Joe Spinell's character in Maniac, who for some reason I can't remember the name of now, even though I've seen that movie a billion times. Can you remember?
I can't, not off the top of my head, no.
It's funny, because I always just think of it as Joe Spinell.
That's right.
But both of those characters, I think, we get a real glimpse into their personalities. And they are... I think Harry. We could sit and probably sit and talk about Christmas Evil for an hour. I think Harry is a decent guy who commits bad acts because he doesn't know any better and he wants to right the wrongs of the world. Whereas Joe Spinell's character, I think, is a bad guy and is quite deluded. This guy, I don't know. I'm sorry, he had a bad childhood. That's a horrible thing. But I don't quite understand how it connects to what he does later on in his life. But indeed, it happens. He's going into these morgues. Most people don't sort of suspect him. When it turns up in the papers that there's this guy, which they assume quite quickly that it's a vampire, even though he hasn't done anything vampiric early on. He's just going in and cutting up bodies, isn't he? And sort of making incisions in them, and like at one point he takes a pair of eyeballs out of a woman, and there's another point where he cuts her head off.
Yeah.
We never really know why, do we? That's never really sort of explained what he's getting from that. He keeps a pair of eyeballs in a jar, preserved. And at one point I was thinking, well, maybe this is going to be a bit cannibalistic. He's going to eat them or something. Because at one point he looked like he was getting ready to open up and pop them in like a pickled onion. And I'm thinking, well, it was not the snack of the day that I would pick, but everybody each to their own. But it doesn't really do anything with that, do they? And then later on, they progress to something that I think works a little bit better, which is that he purchases this straw-like device, doesn't he?
Yeah, and I was wondering, well, it seems to be that other people are saying vampire early on. They're branding this, who they don't know. They don't know who it is doing it, but they're branding him a vampire. And I wonder, is he playing up to that when he gets this double-pronged glass straw, which is a great sort of image, going into the morgues and sticking that in and drinking the blood. It's probably maybe the most iconic image of the film, him doing that. But I don't know. It's just guesswork whether that's his reaction to what they're thinking. Is he playing up to that? I don't know, because we just don't know anything about him.
Yeah, you can look at it from a realism perspective and think, okay, well, first of all, I'm pretty sure embalming procedures, there is drainage of blood that's involved, so there wouldn't actually be any blood in the bodies to begin with. So you have to take, I suppose you have to take realism out of it to some degree. But then it's a film that's also covering a crime that actually did happen several years earlier. I think it's. We've got a piece of feedback that will come obviously towards the end of the show, as it always does, from Chris Brown. Now, I don't want to spoil that for you, of course, but he does say in there, he liked this movie and he thought it was well made. In terms of the way it's shot and everything, there's nothing particularly wrong with it, but I don't think it's that well made. I found, for example, that the music will cut in on other music all the time. So, for example, there'll be a piece of music that plays, and there was just as one example. There's one moment where the guy doesn't have a name, but the character played by Werner Pocath is outside his apartment. He's walking up the stairs, following the young girl. Who, whenever the young girl is around, there's this piece of music that always plays. This sort of fairy, whimsy kind of thing is playing in the background while she's dancing around for no apparent reason. She might have been as mental as he is in the movie, but we never got to find that out. Don't dance on rooftops, kids. That's what this movie teaches you. Yeah. But anyway, so there's a piece of music that plays as he's going up the stairs following her, and then when he goes into his apartment, a completely different piece of music cuts in. So in terms of the music editing and everything, I don't think that's particularly works. Also, somebody is having a field day with a Hammond organ in this movie. Like every time he goes into the morgue to mess about with one of the bodies, like there's one scene in this movie. Most of the time, it's quite sort of tasteful and a bit gothic. But there's one point where somebody just went mad. Like I think someone was having a fist fight with another person, and they happened to be banging into the organ several over and over again because it was getting a bit Phantom of the Opera at times in this. Yeah, I mean, what did you think about the movie in terms of how it was made? I mean, do you think it was made well?
Not particularly. I mean, we've seen worse already, on the Section 3 list.
Yeah.
I like to see different locations. I like to see different places. It's one of the reasons why I like Italian movies so much, because I do like to see different places. And this one had a different kind of view to it. So that was quite interesting, but I didn't think it was that well made. Like I said, those flashback sequences early on were edited into it quite badly. As far as showing the story as well, I mean, he was supposed to be in love with this girl, and her death triggered him to sort of advance a bit in his sort of his criminal acts. But I just never really felt like he had much of a feeling for her in the first place.
Yeah.
It didn't really sell it to me that he was madly in love with this girl, and so when she dies, it just didn't really seem to me that it would be a catalyst for much more, in terms of his depravity and the things he did. So yeah, it fails on a lot of counts for me.
It's one of those things, isn't it? I mean, first of all, the association with the girl is an invention of the film to begin with. As far as I can tell from the real life case, there was never anything like that. I feel like maybe the film might have worked a bit better if she had died very early on.
Yeah.
And if there'd perhaps been more of a relationship between the two of them, and that was the catalyst, to then make him be, what he becomes later on, which is this quote unquote vampire. I think that, but it just doesn't. Like, she sort of dies quite arbitrarily, in my opinion, and he's a little bit upset about it. And then there's the funeral, and then of course he waits for the family to leave. Mm-hmm. The mother's quite suspicious of him, but she never comes into it again. She's sort of eyeing him up, like, why is he staying in the graveyard? And then just leaves, and we never see her again. And he proceeds to dig her up and take a sort of stiffened corpse. I mean, she hasn't died, all that long ago. And then sort of sits her on a bench and then sort of cuddles her for a bit and then goes off, and nothing else is made of it after that, So it seems it seems like filler, really. I mean, I found certain parts of the movie quite seedy as well. I mean, all the stuff with the prostitutes, for example.
Yeah, especially when she squats over this little basin, which seems to be particularly designed to wash your undercarriage, and just gives her a little rinse and then carries on.
Yeah, I mean, I told you I was going to teach you some tips on how to use your new vagina, Tom. That's one of them. Always have a vagina washing bowl and take it with you. I mean, I found that a bit nasty, actually. And also, there's a girl-on-girl scene here with prostitutes. He walks in, and he doesn't partake in anything, but he pays to watch the girls, playing around with each other. And I found it quite gross, actually. Like, I found that part of the movie, and I like sleazy stuff, of course, we both do, yeah. But I think sleazy stuff when it's quite entertaining. I suppose, really, I use this word a lot when I'm reviewing stuff, but I like to be entertained when I watch things, and when I I'm not saying that has to be the sole reason why I like something. There's in fact a film that's got a million miles away from this called Martyrs, which you know very well, Tom. Which is a French film, which I absolutely love, but it saddens me to such a great degree I can't even describe it, really. And so I'm not necessarily entertained when I watch it, but it affects me emotionally.
Yeah.
So with this, it just is. It's so drab. Like, that's the word I would. It's just so drab that not even the sleazier elements of it, they don't pick it up for me.
I don't know where that line between good sleaze and bad sleaze is. It's a strange one, but I don't know. Watching a lady squat over a little vagina bowl, maybe that's on the side of bad sleaze. I don't know. Yeah, you're right. Again, it comes under this thing of this should be right down our alley, but it just isn't.
It is. I mean, we have to talk about the ending, don't we, quickly? Because towards the end of the movie, I guess, again, reflective of the real life crime, this guy whose name I've forgotten again, so I'm going to look at my notes, is Kuno Hoffman. He murdered I think it was 3, living people, and in this movie we sort of and he killed a young couple that were messing around in a car in some place that was secluded. And of course, in the movie, our main man here does the same thing. Right near the end of it, he kills a living couple. In the real life crime, he shot them apparently, but in this movie, he stabs them. Yeah, so it's the only. There's one other. I think there's one other time that he kills somebody living, and that's like a security guard kind of guy, isn't it? He's hiding. He's waiting for the vampire of Nuremberg, as it were, to come in, and so he spots the guy, and the guy manages to wrestle him to the ground and bang his head on the floor lightly a couple of times. That's the end of it. Snuffed his life out, and then so of course he kills this young couple at the end. But the ending shot of it basically is him having. So he's gotten away with the crime. I thought that would be it, but actually we have this ending shot of him. He's been working in this office where everybody in there, apart from one crotchety old guy, makes fun of him because he never speaks, and he has no sense of humour. I mean, that's the thing about this guy, is that he. As an actor, I suppose he does quite a good job with that, because there's no humour in the film whatsoever. It is quite dark through the whole thing, and I like a dark movie, but I like a dark movie that's not also boring. Yeah. But so he's working in his office, and the last shot of the movie basically is the authorities have come into the office, and he's busy there working away, not even aware that anybody's been onto him, and the police come in and they handcuff him, and he looks a bit guilty, and that's the end of it. So how did you feel about the ending? I mean, did he get his comeuppance there?
I suppose. I mean, what I will say is I did find him quite sympathetic in a way. I never... We talked about the levels of, we think Joe Spinell is a bit more of a nasty character, but there's a certain sympathetic quality to this guy. And talking about those closing scenes, I think my actual favourite part of the movie was when he's imagining in his head, as he's stalking this couple, that he is following the dancing girl through the forest. She's dancing through the forest, and it's quite dreamlike because obviously it's in his head, but he's still not cracking a smile, but there's a certain contentment about him, and he's following this girl as she dances through the forest. And it just seemed to me that maybe they were trying to sell that in doing what he does, there's a certain, it calms something in him, or he finds peace in it, or it's sort of fulfilling something in him akin to the feeling he gets when he watches this girl dance. A certain calmness, a certain quietness of mind. He doesn't crack a smile, but he has a look on his face as he follows her. And I quite like these scenes. I think it's the first time that we do maybe get a little glimpse into his head, but I think I'm projecting a lot of what I think onto that rather than what the film is telling us, because I don't really know what it's telling us. But I like it, and it's probably one of the few things that I can come away saying that I did like those scenes. But yeah, he gets locked up at the end, and which is probably for the best. And that's it. Mosquito the rapist is locked up, and he didn't even rape anyone.
No, I mean, that's the thing. I was gonna talk about that, actually, about the title Mosquito the Rapist. I mean, I will just say, so adding on to what you were saying, I mean, I didn't find him particularly sympathetic, to be honest with you. I have to say that somebody else we're going to talk about on this show I found more sympathetic than this guy. But and perhaps also it's because the guy, Kuno Hoffman, who committed the real life crimes, was quite gleeful about the things he'd done,
right,
and didn't regret them at all. And I've got a feeling, looking at this particular character, even though he can't speak, that he's not that ashamed of having done the things that he did. So
I don't know. I would say maybe not ashamed, but I don't think he takes that much joy in it. I think it's fulfilling something within him that he needs to do, but I don't think he's gleefully doing it.
Oh dear, well, watch out for Tom Elliott coming to a morgue near you soon. Yeah, we have to talk about the title. I take your point on board, by the way, but I'm right and you're wrong. So we are talking about Mosquito the Rapist. Well, first of all, like you said, the rapist part of the title doesn't make sense, because he never doesn't rape anybody in the movie.
No.
Unless the rapist is meant to refer to the fact that he is violating the bodies in some way, or maybe they use that title simply because Kuno Hoffman actually was was indulging in necrophilia and was molesting the bodies, and perhaps they were trying to sell it on that point. But the mosquito part of it, the reason that they're using that as part of the alternative title is because when he goes into the morgue and he's done or finished what he's doing, or I don't know if he does it before, writes it before, but before he actually mutilates the bodies, but he writes on the wall the word mosquito with a red marker, and it's meant to be like a calling sign, like here I am, I'm the mysterious mosquito, and I've been here, and now I've escaped, and it's kind of like like a sort of a sign of my name. This is who I am. You'll never catch me, kind of thing. But the rapist part of it, is a bit. It makes it sound, in a way, the title, it fits better in terms of, because I think it represents the film perhaps a little bit better, because it's an exploitation film, isn't it, at the end of the day, and it's quite seedy and sleazy, whereas Bloodlust is I think quite a more generic title. I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah. I see what you're saying. I think maybe we need Gore Blimey to take a look at this one, because he seems, he spotted that Kevin Bacon hand job that we didn't see. Maybe there's something going on that we're missing,
maybe there was about 15 minutes of dialogue that we missed, that Gore Blimey, I mean, he's quite attentive. I mean, he listens to The Archers, which is a damn shame, but he appears to be quite attentive, so perhaps he can get something out of it that we didn't. Give it a go, Gore.
Go on, there'll be some little sex act that he sees that we missed, that'll justify the title. Mosquito the Rapist.
The name Gore Blimey is quite similar to Gore Boy, isn't it? Do you think I've got a lawsuit on my hands?
I think you might. Now we've settled the Chris Brown incident, we'll have a look into that one.
I think I've got I'm coming for you, Gore. All right, so I think that's pretty much it. I mean, do you have any other sort of general feelings about it? Or?
No, not really. I don't think I'll ever watch this movie again. It was interesting to a degree, but it really fell short. There's much better examples of this slice of life, spending time with a lunatic maniac films out there, and we've seen one of them already on the list, and there's not really much else to add.
Let me read you some trivia here very quickly, and then we'll move on to our next film. The main star here, Werner Pocath, actually had quite a prolific acting career in Germany. He has 82 acting credits to his name on IMDb. He also worked as an assistant and casting director on a number of projects. He also had a brief role in Dario Argento's The Cat O' Nine Tails, part of the director's Animal trilogy, which you don't like, do you?
No.
You mad fool. Pocath passed away in 1993 at the age of 53, so he died quite young, really. The director of the film, Marijan Vajda, also had an incredibly prolific career as a director, if IMDb is to be believed. He has 81 directing credits to his name, almost all of which, I think there are only about 3 or 4 that aren't. Most of which are documentary shorts. He was born in 1920. His career seemed to begin in the very early 50s. Bloodlust was one of the few feature-length films he made, and it was in fact his last one. Now, it doesn't say on IMDb whether he passed away. I would imagine if he was born in 1920, there's a very good chance of it. But for some reason, whether he died early or not, I don't know, but Bloodlust was the last thing he ever worked on. And finally, Ellen Umlauf, who played the mother of the young girl here, had perhaps the most prolific acting career of anyone in the film. She has 120 credits to her name, and was even in a film with the young Colin Firth and Peter O'Toole called Wings of Fame in 1990, which I've not seen. She passed away in the year 2000 at the age of 74. If you want to get Bloodlust, it's a tricky film to get hold of. Tom and I had to. This is the first one actually that we had to buy. Previously we've owned copies of them, or we've been able to find them quite easily. This one was a bit tricky to get hold of. You can score an occasional copy on eBay, like we did. We sort of jointly purchased it. You may be able to find one lurking somewhere under the title Mosquito the Rapist. There are also VHS copies out there in America with the title Bloodlust, the Vampire of Nuremberg. I've seen them on Amazon.com, so you may be able to pick up a VHS one if you're that way inclined. And alternatively, you can see the film on YouTube. It's quite easy to find on there. The problem is that it's all in the original German dialogue and there are no subtitles. But to be honest with you, there's not a lot of dialogue in the movie, and it's not, I think you can infer enough from what we've told you about the story to fill it in yourself, really, can't you?
Yeah, you're right, actually. You probably could get by with that, and if I'd have known that, we wouldn't have bothered buying it. But if you really want to own it, then there's going to be a copy going on eBay soon.
Yes, there will be, and I will neither confirm or deny that it was put there by us.
No. Okay. Well, that's all to be said on that one. Shall we move on to Martin?
Indeed, and now it is over to you, my good friend. Tell us about Martin.
Okay, Martin, released in 1978, written and directed by George Romero. Martin Matthias, a strange, pensive young man of barely 20, rides the train to Pittsburgh. He's travelling there to meet with his grand-uncle Tatekude, is that how you say it?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Now his closest living relative. Before he arrives, Martin, played by John Amplas, spots a young woman boarding alone on the train. With a pre-prepared bag of items at his disposal, Martin fills a syringe with some kind of liquid and sneaks into the room. Surprising the woman, he injects her with a sleeping agent and fights off her attacks until she loses consciousness. Stripping naked, he hugs her similarly naked body and slices her wrist, enjoying the flow of the blood as it slithers down her arm and onto his chest. Arriving in Pittsburgh, Martin moves in with Tatekude, played by Lincoln Mazel. My God, the names in this episode. A much older gentleman who is incredibly suspicious of his young relative. He reveals very quickly what he truly believes, that Martin is Nosferatu, a real vampire. According to him, it's been a tradition to destroy particular members of the family who bear the symptoms of vampirism, and Martin is next on the list. Though clearly disturbed, Martin himself denounces the accusations, believing it to all be superstition. Kuda is convinced nonetheless, and displays crosses and cloves of garlic around the house. He also warns Martin to stay away from his granddaughter Christina, played by Christine Forrest, a kindly woman who also lives in the house and refuses to believe Kuda's stories. He has one final rule: if Martin kills anyone in town, he'll destroy him. Securing a job in Kuda's shop, Martin proceeds to live a banal life, mostly keeping to himself. After running deliveries to local residents, he meets Abby Santini, a bored housewife who soon exhibits desire for Martin, partly because he rarely speaks, but always listens. Despite Martin dismissing his granduncle's superstitions, he's someone with a lust for blood, and his behaviour continues when he spots a vulnerable woman whose husband is leaving town for a business trip. Sneaking into the property, he's met with the woman and her lover unexpectedly and has to battle them both. Armed with his kit that includes the syringes and razor blades, he takes the man down and feasts on his blood. Satisfied, he leaves the woman unconscious but alive. With an ongoing affair between him and Mrs. Santini satisfying his need for physical love with someone alive, his bloodlust becomes harder to satisfy. He's constantly seeing flashbacks of a time presumably long in the past when he's been feasting on another woman, as an angry town mob threatens to find him, though we never know if these visions are of real events or not. When Mrs. Santini takes her own life, it proves to be the final straw for an angry Kuda. Is Martin really a vampire? Is Kuda correct? Or is Martin simply a deranged person who needs help? Perhaps it's Martin himself who doesn't even know what he truly is.
I can't believe this is happening. It's a nightmare for you and him.
Your father was not from our part of the world. Your mother knew. She believed.
Well, if she did, then thank God I was too little to know her.
Martin had his father until he was 32.
Grandfather, he is just a boy.
Look in the book, Christina. We had the books of the family. Did you ever look?
Of course, the books. The books will show it. Those damn books, they should be burned. That's where you get your horrible ideas.
Ask the boy himself. Ask Martin. He will tell you.
He's unbalanced. He's mad, and you and those books have driven him to it.
He is Nosferatu. He was born to Alina Bulresa and Rudy Matthias in the old country in 1892. He is young for Nosferatu. There have been 9 such occurrences in the family. There are 3 still alive. Martin is one. Caldo Maldoli is the eldest in the family now. From the old country, he sends the letters telling who will take the Pomgreen to their house. We obey. First, for the family shame. And again, because to defy the evil ones is to bring a curse upon oneself. I will not shame the family, but the devil can take my soul. I would have destroyed the children the moment they showed the signs. Elena Budoresa took her own life instead. Now, Martin comes to me. People cannot come to other people's beliefs. It's hard for you, I know. It's hard for anyone young. Do you believe that God's whole world runs by the laws of the few sciences we have been able to discover? Oh, no, Christina. There is more. But people are satisfied. They know so much, they think they know all. And that makes it easy for Nosferatu.
So, Chris, our second vampire question mark movie of the night. What do you think of Martin?
Well, this is the first time we've come to a George Romero film on the list, and there is another one on there. I think Dawn of the Dead is on there, which we'll get to later on. I'm a big fan of George Romero. I think that's no secret. And, of course, I mean, Romero primarily is known for the Dead trilogy. Not a trilogy anymore, really, is it? But I think there are 6 films in the series now, but I always view the first 3 as being the definitive trilogy. The other ones I'm not so keen on, to be honest. But not many people talk that often about the work that he's done outside of the Dead films. So, he invented the zombie as we know it today. You watch The Walking Dead, which is probably the most popular zombie property that exists at the moment, and everything in there is because of George Romero, was inspired by the work that he did back in the 60s. But he has done some interesting work outside of those movies. Now, Martin is one that I've owned for many years, and yourself, we've seen it, I think, several times. Mm-hmm. I have to say that the first few times I saw it, I always found some good things in it and some very interesting stuff to get into. But I also always had a problem with it. Several problems. Now, I have to say, this was the best. Watching it again, this was the best time I've had with it. It's been quite a while since I'd seen it, and it seemed to work better for me this time around. I don't know why that is. That's why sometimes it is worth watching a film more than once. And there's always been something about it that has grabbed me, but I think it's problematic. But just as a sort of general, sort of flow of thoughts, and then handing it over to you, and we can kind of get into the nitty-gritty of it. I think there are things about it that are very interesting. I think there are things about it that are quite unique, actually. I think it still stands up as quite a unique piece of work. I think in terms of pacing, I think it's a bit too slow for its own good a lot of the time. I think the acting and the dialogue is not... It's not bad, but it's not great. It's before Romero was really refined. Now, of course, this is the film that he made before he made Dawn of the Dead, which many people consider to be his masterpiece. So I think there's better work to come from him. But there's some... Watching it this time, there's some stuff in here that I perhaps missed the last few times I saw it, and I got more out of it this time, I have to say.
Good. For me, I have to really be in the mood to watch Martin, and that's not to say I don't like it. I do. I remember me and Matt were going to watch it on the Gentleman's Grindhouse once, but I just couldn't be arsed watching it. So.
Yeah, I remember that as well. Yeah.
So we just didn't do it. You're right, the pace of it is very, very slow. And sometimes if I'm in the mood for that, I don't mind it because it has a certain quality to it, a time and a place. Like I say, locations to me sometimes are just as important as anything else, and this sort of Pittsburgh area that it's set in is quite, obviously it's not a beautiful, no offense to anyone in Pittsburgh, but the sort of urban environment is quite fascinating to me. So there is that, but like you say, it is quite a slow film. But that's not to say there's nothing to enjoy. If I'm in the right mood for it, I do enjoy it quite a bit. It is our first Romero movie, and both Night and Dawn are on the list, so we're going to do them as a double bill down the line. But
nice.
You're right. We spoke about Sean Cunningham. We felt is not a great director. He got lucky. We've both controversially think that a bit about Wes Craven. Now the thing with George Romero is I don't class him in as the same thing as that. I don't think he's a not talented director who got lucky, but I think he was very much of a time and a place, and the more you draw him away from that, the less he is effective, you know.
Ooh, controversial opinion, Elliot. Controversial opinion.
Mate, you only need to watch Survival of the Dead, you know what I mean, to know where I'm coming from.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can't argue with that. I mean, so we're not going to sit and talk about the Dead films, but but there's been there's been a sharp fall from grace. I will say that, as far as what he's done. I don't know, since the early 2000s onwards, and some may even argue before that with films like Bruiser, for example. But but I don't know if I can quite say that he was of a time and a place. I think that again, we'll get into the history of the Dead films, but the man has had a considerable amount of trouble securing funding for anything but zombie movies.
Yeah.
It's just been one of those things where he's pitched ideas to studios and they said, well, we're not really interested in that, but do you want to do another Dead film? And the only way he's been able to make movies is by taking those projects. And unfortunately, he's also, I mean, I was actually reading an interview with him that he did for The Telegraph, I think it was back in 2013, and he seems like he's quite a fan of digital effects now, CG blood and things like that.
Right.
And I don't think it works at all, and especially not in the Romero films, Land of the Dead. What was the other one? Diary of the Dead and Survival of the Dead. But those last two in particular have some terrible CGI effects in them, gore effects, and it seems a bit lazy to me. Yeah. I do think I'll say it this way, not to take away from the point you were making, of course. I feel like, I'm not saying that he couldn't make something good now, but I think certainly there was a time where he was super effective and creative as a director, much like Dario Argento is, and unfortunately he's just dropped off and will never reach that level again. That's just one of those, the same as, Argento's probably at this point made more bad movies than he has good, but he had that run, sort of through the 70s and through the 80s, and then after that it's lost. So I think that the same thing has affected Romero.
What it comes down to for me is Romero in the 70s in Pittsburgh with a budget that he needed to be creative with a certain set of people around him. He collaborated with Savini a few times, that sort of thing. That seems to me where he thrived, But when the landscape changed, he didn't necessarily change with it for the better. And I see what you're saying, he has had difficulties with securing funding and all that. Unfortunately, he has been pigeonholed. But that's the way it seems to me. That was a sweet spot for Romero,
Yeah.
And if that had been a time and a place that had stayed for longer, we probably would have seen more, great movies from him. But unfortunately, it didn't.
No, I can agree with that. And I think also if you look at somebody like David Cronenberg, for example, who we talked extensively about when we did Rabbit and Scanners earlier, I think it was the second episode, he is somebody who I think has kept up with the times incredibly well.
Definitely.
Where he's adapted. Every decade that's gone by, year after year, you can see an evolution in terms of his filmmaking. And you're absolutely right. But I do think that some of that is down to the fact that I think Romero has wanted to do a lot of projects that just never... I mean, he did The Dark Half, for example, which was the biggest budgeted film he had, and it was a huge failure, and he hated doing it. And I just think there are things that have played against him as well. So it's not... I don't think it's all because he just was of a particular time. But I can't argue with you in terms of his output and what it's been like since then. I think that he had a great sweet spot there, and unfortunately... it's not there anymore. But let's get into talking about Martin and sort of the plot of it. So we've got, much like Bloodlust, it's interesting, I watched Martin after I watched Bloodlust, and there are real similarities between them. I was quite sort of surprised by that. Because I'd skipped through Bloodlust when I was, sort of checking out the DVD to make sure everything was okay on there and the English dialogue was fine. And from skipping through, it didn't look great, I have to say. And then actually watching the movie, I'm like, okay, well, it's not that bad, it's not that great, it is what it is. And then watching Martin afterwards, I immediately thought, okay, there is a similarity in that, both of our main figures here, the man in Bloodlust and Martin, they're not traditional vampires by any means. I think Martin is a classier film. Without a doubt. It's not sleazy, it's not an exploitation movie. It is a serious attempt to sort of reinvent the vampire movie with this young kid played by John Amplas. And I think this is one of the clever things about the movie. You are never... you're never given too much information. You have to make up your own mind about the things that you're seeing, because at no point does Romero sit and explain to you, well, this is actually what it was. And when you finish the movie, you have to come up with your own theory as to how you feel about this particular character. Was he a vampire or was he not a vampire? And I do like that about the movie, that it does make you think. And a lot of the classic Romero stuff does that, I think.
Yeah. The good thing about it is his uncle thinks him to be a vampire in the very traditional sense. Now, Martin himself thinks he's a vampire, but he doesn't think he's a vampire in that sense. He says there's no magic. He says that a lot. There's no magic. But he's not saying he's not a vampire, because he does think he's a vampire, because he says he's 82 years old or something like that. He just thinks that all of the trappings that we know about vampires are, bullshit. It's all fiction and superstition, when in fact it's more, or he believes himself to be a vampire more in a, I suppose, biological sense than a magical sense. But the likelihood is that both of them are wrong, and he's just a fucked up kid,
Yeah, I mean, watching it this time, I found that it was interesting to examine the family history that's there. So you've got Tatakuda, of course, his granduncle or uncle, and it does. This is the first time watching it where I sat and thought, of course, it's never definitively explained to you, but my feeling is that, I mean, I put it in here as a talking point where we kind of discuss whether we think Martin is actually a vampire or not. My personal feeling on it is that he isn't, that he's a deranged kid, but he's got this family history of these people who have historically filled, I guess, the heads of various family members in the past, and it's been handed down from generation to generation that this particular person is a vampire, and there's all this mythology that's involved in their family. And I feel like a lot of that stuff kind of brainwashed Martin into believing that he is a vampire. But he doesn't believe in like I say, he's not a superstitious person. He doesn't believe in the magic and the gimmicky aspects of being a vampire, running around wearing a cape.
That's right.
With fangs. But there's something in there that tells me that this is not a kid who needed a stake through the heart. He probably needed therapy.
Yeah.
That's my feeling on it. Is that I've never thought that he is a vampire. I think he believes himself to be. He believes himself to be one because he's got all this history in his family of people telling him that he is one, and so that's my feeling. I mean, what say you?
Yeah, I feel the same. He's obviously mentally ill in some way, and he's latched onto this part of his family history. Unfortunately, his uncle's is crazy in his own way, that he believes that vampirism exists. I mean, Romero himself, I've read interviews where he said he thinks he's just a messed up kid, and I think that too. The historic scenes are thrown in there to perhaps raise that ambiguity a bit more, but it's easy to write off as these are in his head. He's imagined these things. I think he's a messed up kid, like you say, who needed to latch onto something and fulfill something within him that killing does. And he does it, and he does it quite well. And what I like about the kills in the movie is he plans them very meticulously in his method, but they're still quite clumsy. They're still quite realistic. There's a scrappiness to them that I think is very effective and very realistic.
Well, it's funny because he's always calling into this radio station, and they call him the Count on there, because obviously he doesn't give his real name, and he's just explaining the things he does and why he has this sort of lust for blood, and whether they believe him or not is another thing entirely. But he always says on there, well, I'm really careful. But in actual fact, he's not, is he really? I mean, he's quite... I mean, the sleeping agent that he uses on women, and indeed on a man in the sort of home invasion scene that's in the middle of this, it takes a long time to take effect. So every time he does it, there's always this big fight that occurs, and it takes quite a long time for it to kick in. So, and he's barely 20, so there's a lot in there that you feel he hasn't refined. And it doesn't make him a good person at all. In fact, he's quite a bad person in many ways. He always says to his intended victim, look, I don't want to hurt you. I'm not going to hurt you. You're just going to go to sleep for a while, which is not particularly reassuring because you don't know what the guy's going to do, of course. But I do like the couple of murder scenes that we get in here. I think are done quite well, and it's quite original as well. That's the one thing I take away from this movie is that I've not really seen anything like it before or since. It is similarities with Bloodlust. I think this is a better movie than Bloodlust.
Definitely.
But it is, in terms of pacing, it's a little bit similar in that it stays very much at the same pace through the whole thing. I mean, how do you feel about John Amplas as the lead actor here?
He has a natural quality about him that I like. I don't think he's a great actor by any means, but his clumsiness as an actor probably helps with the character to a degree because he's this clumsy kid. Just as a brief side note, maybe it's just me, but I always think of Dexter when I watch this movie. Did you watch Dexter?
I did, yeah, the whole thing.
Yeah, I always think of Dexter when I watch this, going, picking locks, going in the syringe. Dexter was a lot better at it, but, that's the way it goes. But, yeah, I like John Amplas in this. Like I say, he has a natural quality that fits with the natural sort of flow of the film, the way things are filmed quite in a quite laconic way. So, yeah, I like him. I mean, what about you?
Yeah, I think he's fine. Good look to him. I know that sort of reading the IMDb trivia on it, the character was originally supposed to be quite a bit older.
Oh, really?
And then they saw John Amplas doing a stage play, or Romero did rather, and liked him so much that they rewrote the character to be a lot younger. And I think he works better as a younger actor. I don't think he was ever going to be a leading star in any of Romero's stuff to follow, and indeed he wasn't. He was in, I guess probably the most notable thing he was in after this was, he was in Day of the Dead and Night Riders, but I remember him as, I think I can't remember if he's a doctor or a scientist in Day of the Dead.
He is, yeah, one of the scientists.
But yeah, didn't really have a big career after this, to be honest with you. But on film anyway, on the stage apparently he had an enormously successful career. Well, certainly a very distinguished stage career. Anyway, to say enormously successful, but yeah, absolutely fine. And I mean, Romero himself appears in this movie as a priest, and I actually thought he was quite decent.
He was.
I'm surprised that he hasn't acted in more stuff because he didn't have the look of being somebody who was out of his element.
He just seemed very natural in it, and this is the thing about everyone in it. It just seems like a very day-to-day film. Even Savini, when he comes in it, he's just quite a regular guy. Everyone's just so normal. It works to that degree, but like I say, I need to be in the mood for it because the escalation isn't quite there. It doesn't ramp up and ramp up and ramp up. It does in a way with that final, that close to final scene where he has to fight the guy and stuff like that. But I like the natural quality of it, and Romero feeds into that quite well.
Look, overall, I mean, do we have anything else that we want to sort of look at in the plot? I mean, he gets involved in this relationship with Abby Santini, who's a married, bored housewife. Quite sort of interesting part of the movie, really, because she clearly expresses some desire towards him, and then he ends up, barging in at one point and says, "You want to have sex with me, don't you?" And she's like, "Yep." And they commit the act, and after that, I think it's quite an interesting part in that she immediately feels deep regret for it. Never really spells it out as such. Never says, "I can't believe I cheated with you." And she ends up taking her own life in the bathtub later on. I think that's quite an interesting part of the movie. Something that's probably not mentioned that often is that there is this character who's not in it very often, but has this incredible crisis emotionally when she realises that she's cheated on her husband with this much younger guy.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't really got that much to say about it. It's interesting in the evolution of Martin as a character, because this is obviously quite a big deal for him, having sex with a live woman and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know, mate, to be honest. A lot of it washes over me. That sounds like I'm damning it, but I'm not. But it's interesting that there is an Italian cut of the film. And
yes,
I seen it a while ago. I wish I'd have had the time to watch it again, but the Italian cut is a bit faster, a bit pacier. And also an interesting part of it is the conversations with the DJ. I can't remember what they say, and I wish I could. I know I've spoke about it on a previous podcast sometime, but there's a different purpose to it. Can you remember them? Have you seen that cut?
I haven't seen the cut, no, to be honest with you. So I only actually heard about it the other day when I was researching this one.
Yeah, it's totally different. They repurpose those conversations, but I can't remember how and why they do it. But it puts a different spin on those conversations, which is quite an interesting thing. And it's actually a decent cut, and I'd recommend it because you can get it on the Arrow Video version. So it's worth checking out. Plus, it's got a Goblin soundtrack on it, which is always good.
Well, see, I'm quite fearful of that because I know that it wasn't Romero's intention. You see, that's why I'm fearful of it. Repurposing the dialogue is not, would not have been what he wanted. Having said that, I would like to hear the Goblin score actually. So I would like to see the cut because obviously I'm sort of speaking about it from an uneducated position. I can't speak properly anymore, but yeah, it's. Otherwise, I can understand why it washes over you, and it did for me, to be honest with you, several times in the past. For some reason, this time around, it seemed to sort of captivate me a little bit more. I still think it's problematic in a lot of ways. It's rough around the edges. I don't think it's anywhere near being one of his best films. Having said that, Romero did, for quite a long time, make some very interesting, thought-provoking stuff, and I think this is a good example of that. It's... I've never really seen anything like it before or since, and I think there are much better vampire movies out there. And you can say, well, is this a vampire movie at all? It's questionable, much like with Bloodlust. But I think there are enough elements there to where it's something very different. And if you've never seen it before, I have to recommend it to you. But be prepared for the slow pacing. Be prepared for it to not... It doesn't have the high-kicking energy of something like Dawn of the Dead. It's a completely different kind of movie, different tone entirely. There's really no comedy in this, whereas Dawn of the Dead has a lot of comedy in it. And a lot of sort of jovial moments interspersed with the horror and the action and everything. And this doesn't have any. It doesn't have any action as such. A little bit here and there. I think the sort of the final act of it speeds up quite a bit, actually, and sort of seems to... one big criticism I have is I think the ending shot of... Now, this is a spoiler, folks, because we always go all the way on this show, like Tom said on a previous episode. Hopefully you've seen the film already. If not, I don't know, fast forward a minute or so. But the ending shot of the movie is Cuda finally coming in. He's heard that Mrs. Santini is dead. Now, she took her own life before Martin got to the house, but he thinks Martin killed her. And of course, his final rule, as Tom read out in the synopsis, is don't take anyone from this town. If you do that, I will destroy you. And sure enough, he does. He jams a stake into his... I was going to say heart. It doesn't look like it ended up in his heart. But...
It's like 2 foot away, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's more in his stomach. But I think it feels a bit rushed to me. Because it is one minute Martin's walking in a parade, and the next minute it flashes to him in bed and he's got a stake in him. I thought that was rushed a little bit. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I can't disagree. I mean, I don't know. There's quite clumsy elements to it, and I think that's one of them. It's not a perfect movie. I would actually put it quite high on my list of favourite Romero movies, to be honest, because although I need to be in the mood for it, I do think that uniqueness that you spoke about and the certain unique qualities, or put it up there. So I don't know. I haven't really got much more to say on it other than I recommend it too.
Yeah, and I should say, I mean, I was probably a bit harsh saying it's nowhere near any of his best films. It is a good film, and I don't mean to downplay that at all. But I just think there's much better work to be found. Of course, the Dead trilogy, for example. But I do think this is well worth watching. I mean, there's a few films in his collection outside of the Dead films that I think are really worth looking at if you've not really explored his filmography, and I think this is one of them. But it's problematic and rough in a lot of ways. But I think it this time around it sort of, like I said at the beginning of the review, it's the best time I've had with it.
Good.
Yeah, and you can't say more than that, really. Well worth a watch, I think. Now, let me give you some trivia, of course. Tom already spoiled a bit of my trivia with the Italian cut. But Martin had its premiere in 1977 at the Cannes Film Festival. It debuted in the US in 1978. That's why I wrote the release date on the synopsis there as 78. On IMDb it says 77, but it was only released in France in 77. It was the same thing with Dawn of the Dead. Dawn of the Dead was actually released in the US in 79, but it was made in 78, and it sort of debuted in another country in 78. So it can get a bit tricky, but I suppose you could say in general it was released in 1977. It debuted in the US in 1978, the same year that Romero was finishing off work on Dawn of the Dead, the film often considered his masterpiece. Both Romero himself and Tom Savini, as we explained, have acting roles in the movie. Romero plays Father Howard, a priest who visits the Cuda house. Savini plays the boyfriend of Christine. I think his name was Arthur. Christina was played by Christine Forrest. She would go on to marry Romero a couple of years later, and I think they had certainly a son together. Cameron, I think is his name, who's a director in his own right now. I don't think they're married anymore, but I think she married him before he started wearing those gigantic glasses. So I would imagine that if he was wearing those at the time she met him, it probably would have factored into her decision to marry him in the first place. Romero, actually, I like his giant. I'm going to get a gigantic pair of glasses someday, mate. Don't you worry about that. Romero was in serious debt by the time he came around to making this movie. According to IMDb, his resolve not to declare bankruptcy and maintain promises to his previous investors convinced producer Richard P. Rubinstein to partner up to help get the movie made, which I think is a class act on Romero's part. Rubinstein has a part in the film as the husband of the woman who cheats. Romero would remain in debt until the release of Dawn of the Dead, which was enough of a financial success to help him pay it off. Lead actor John Amplas didn't have a prolific acting career in film, but he did on stage, where he spent much of his life acting and directing productions. He's also a professor at the Conservatory of Performing Arts at Point Park University, where he teaches acting. Amplas did appear in several other Romero films, those being Dawn of the Dead, Night Riders, Creepshow, and Day of the Dead. He's returned to film work since the early 2000s, and he has a couple of films in post-production at the moment. And finally, according to Romero, the film originally had a running time of 2 hours and 45 minutes. Here it's about 95 minutes, I believe, the theatrical cut. This much longer cut was entirely in black and white, which was Romero's original intention. It was something the studio disliked when he pitched it to them. Romero did confirm that no known copies of this cut exist. There is also, of course, the Italian cut that Tom mentioned that was released under the name Vampire. What a terrible name that is, Vampire. And this version has Italian dubbing throughout and a score written and performed by Goblin. I would assume that it has subtitles as well. Yeah. But you've seen it.
Yeah.
Martin is available in the UK on DVD from Arrow Video. This excellent 2-disc special edition. I say excellent, I don't actually own it, but now I want to. This special edition includes the theatrical cut in 5.1, a number of special features, and the Italian cut of the movie. Apparently a Blu-ray version of this release was planned, but it was cancelled at the time. So I don't know, is it a film that would translate well to HD format? What do you think?
I don't know, it's got a slightly grimy quality about it, and the time and the place, those Pittsburgh neighborhoods, I don't particularly need it in HD, but I'd give it a look.
Yeah, well, I've been saying this for at least a few months now, or, well, I don't know, a month or two. If you're gonna put fucking Necromantic on Blu-ray, you can put anything on Blu-ray, and I own a copy of it, so I'm not slagging it off, but really. So there you go, folks. That was Martin, directed by George Romero and released in 1978. Right, my friend, I believe we have some feedback.
We do. Who's going to go first?
Well, why don't you read the email from Rob Walker, Tom, and I will take the next one.
Okay. Rob says, first and foremost, I appreciate all of the hard work that goes into each episode, and whether or not I'm familiar with the films discussed, it's always a joy to hear you two gentlemen give context to these movies, applying your unique perspectives and expertise. Your examinations inspire me to track some of these films down and expand my viewing diet, although some of them might be better left to obscurity. Yeah, you're right there, Rob. Regarding the Foxy Brown Naked Fist episode, it was an absolute delight to hear your very personal thoughts regarding these films. Hearing Chris's experience concerning race and ethnicity was brilliant, as well as hearing Tom give his very impassioned views on the current unbalanced economic culture. And just before the talk got too heavy, levity was given by Chris declaring that he liked Pam Grier's tits.
Yes, still do.
While I understand that the purpose of a show like this isn't to get political, I'm not sure anyone can discuss a list of films that were officially or unofficially banned by their nation's government without discussing politics in some measure. You both handled it wonderfully. Thanks very much, Rob. It's interesting because we're speaking about these films as part of the the whole video nasties thing. I don't really think we talk about the video nasties kind of
the censorship and
we don't speak about that much. I think Chris Brown pretty much covered that in the Video Nasties podcast, and because we're talking about what some would consider the lesser nasties, we've gone for a more sort of general approach. Are they good films? Are they bad films? Maybe when we come to the end of this list, we will sum up our thoughts on that a bit more. But I'm glad you didn't mind us sort of adding those elements to that discussion last time round. So Rob goes on to say, on the subject of Friday the 13th, having just recently watched 1 to 7, many for the first time, I was always more of a Nightmare on Elm Street fan. I feel like you both hit the nail on the head. The first two in the series begin a mythology that, in my opinion, would later be perfected in films 4 and 6. Both feature likeable casts and engaging lead performers and serve to set the foundation for the series as a whole. I do appreciate the expanded look at the slasher genre as context for this well-known series, while I don't think that any horror fan would disagree that the first Halloween represents the high watermark for the slasher genre. For brute killers, alive or zombie, no slasher beats Jason. Yeah, you're right. Thank you both again for the hard work you put into creating this wonderful show. I look forward to many more wonderful episodes. Take care, Rob Walker. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, Rob Walker, he makes some very good videos, very professional. Yeah, he's the kind of guy you would look at him, look at the videos he makes and think, why on earth would you be listening to us? But he's put some of his links up there. You can go to his website, Rob Walker. You go to his website, robwalkerfilms.com. He's on Twitter as well, twitter.com/timid werewolf. I have to say, Rob, I don't think that's a combination that works very well, is it really? Being a timid werewolf. Nobody wants that. Facebook, you can find him, facebook.com/robwalkerfilms. Check him out. Give him a follow. That's what you do on Twitter, isn't it? Give him a follow, give him a like. And yeah, thank you very much for that, Rob. Really appreciate it. Now, I have an email from Seth McKevlin. He's always there, isn't he, Tom?
He is. Very loyal.
Yeah, very loyal. Hiding in the background like a perv. I'm going to read this email now. He says, hey guys, I really enjoyed your Friday the 13th show. You ended up talking about the whole series. We know, which was good since I'm a fair weather fan, and it reminded me of the good times and bad and inspired me to watch the whole series again. I just got to say, we didn't intend when we started recording the show on talking about the whole series, but we ended up doing it anyway. I've gotten up to part 7 so far, since Netflix US has parts 1 to 4 and 6 to 8 streaming. I know Tom likes to keep his shows at 90 minutes or less, but I really enjoy longer shows and I could have listened to you do a proper retrospective for hours. Outside of The Thing, I believe this was the first time we've heard you speak about movies that you were actually fans of and had a lot of experience with. It was a nice change of pace. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think I'm quite a big fan of Scanners. Are there any other examples there that
I can't remember now. My memory's going a bit.
Oh dear, you are getting old, aren't you, boy? You can't remember anything. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that you guys didn't like Martin. We did. Personally, I really liked it, even more than I thought I would. I really enjoy its slice of life story, and Martin was certainly that. As it starts out, we're already in the middle of his vampire antics and we don't know what's going on. As the movie progresses, it tells a story, but more often just follows Martin's exploits until the end with no major story arc. It was also fun to see George Romero acting in this one as well. I didn't expect that. My tastes definitely lean toward the underdog, and I give smaller movies more of a pass than I do big budget franchises. As for Bloodlust, I'm afraid you are on your own. I tried watching a little, but as I said previously, the Friday the 13th series sounded a lot more appealing, so I caught up on that instead. I'm really looking forward to hearing your take on it, and perhaps I'll watch it after I find out more. Then again, maybe not. Guys, I hope you're both feeling strange and deadly again and ready to get back to doing the show. I understand that there are going to be times that work and life take priority over podcasting. Anyone who's followed your podcasting careers knows that there are going to be gaps in there. We're always waiting with bated breath for the next show, and this next one is going to be fun. See you guys on 42nd Street. Seth. Thank you very much for that, Seth. I have to say, obviously I pretended that Tom had turned into a woman. He didn't really. When you hear that voice, you know that that's 100% man. It was work commitments that delayed us for a week, and we actually don't intend on having gaps in there, do we, mate? It's not as if we get bored of doing the show. It just happens to be that something comes up sometimes.
No, we really like doing it, and I think that we've kept it very simple, very linear on purpose, because we both lead busy lives, and it's the easier this show is to produce, then the more likely it is that we will get it out on time. I mean, the Twilight Zone podcast is very sporadic because it's a very labour-intensive podcast, but we've tried to keep this one easy so we can keep to that 2-weekly schedule, and I think for the most part we will.
Yeah, this is a big passion project for us, so I would say that it's not going to be very often that we miss a week, but sometimes it happens. What can you do? That's like, we'll always let you know. If you're ever wondering why an episode hasn't come out on the Friday, just check our Twitters, because it's very likely the reason for it will be up on there. So thank you very much, Seth, once again. Always love hearing from you. Very nice chap. Talk to him by email sometimes, so thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. We've had some audio feedback again from our regular feedbacker, Chris Brown, the man who brought us the Video Nasties podcast, and he's got another podcast out, Chris. Have you heard it yet? No,
not interested. No, I haven't. I'm subscribed to it on my podcatcher on the iPad, but I haven't listened to it yet. But I believe it's called The History of Horror. That's right.
It is called The History of Horror, and the first episode's out now, maybe 2 by the time this one goes out.
Yeah, do listen to it, because he's a good guy and he supports us. I think he may have given us a name drop in it, but I'm not sure. I hope I haven't said that and I turn out to be disappointed. But did he give us a name drop?
He did indeed. It's a good show, and it's quite fresh, something different for horror podcasting, so I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes.
Yeah, me too. Good luck to him.
Good. Okay, well, let's have a listen to what he's got to say about Bloodlust and Martin.
Hi chaps, Christopher Brown here. Just here to talk about the 2 films that you're talking about this week. Really interested, actually. Martin, for me, is is my favourite non-zombie Romero film. It's the film he did just before Dawn of the Dead, and it is, for me, very, very subversive, very artfully shot, quite melancholy, almost, reminds me quite European style, in terms of, it's quite slow shots. It is, it does get criticised for being so slow, but I think the third act is wonderful and really well put together, and wonderfully intelligent to me. That kind of query of, what is Martin really? Is he what he says he is? Is that even possible? Or is he, a different thing entirely? And then obviously, the sadness of the final act, and there's a kind of sense he's a terrible person, but there's a sense of injustice anyway, which I really enjoy. I'd never seen Bloodlust before, and I know it goes by lots of different names, one of them being Mosquito the Rapist, which I think kind of shows far more how much of an exploitation film this really is. It is a character study. It's a character study in the same way Maniac is a character study, though. You don't really kind of get a proper feeling, I feel, for why he's the way he is. There's hints of child abuse and violence in the home, and an alcoholic father. But to go from there to being the kind of man who would, the necrophilic elements of it, the just hot, really quite grim stuff. Obviously, I'm not surprised. It caught the eye of the authorities. I'm surprised it wasn't on the Video Nasties list, in truth, after watching it, because there is a very clear link between, nudity and violence in this film, which gives it that, double thumbs up sleaziness, if nothing else. It's a bit, I don't know, I think for me, I think it's quite a good film. I think it's well made. It certainly is designed to shock, and it does do that. I was feeling, I watched it not knowing what to expect at all, no idea, and it kind of blindsided me with how grim it was and quite confrontational. So that really impressed me, and for that reason, I really, really enjoyed it. But it is quite, quite bleak, and also, it's not the best directed film I've ever seen in my life. It's quite clunky. Some of the acting's quite clunky. The dubbing's quite clunky, and I think I probably would have given it more of a pass if it wasn't sitting next to Martin, which I do admit that I hold a lot higher in regard than a lot of people do. But generally, a really good quality double bill. Nice and sleazy, which I'm sure we all agree is where we want to be if we're covering these kind of films. So thanks very much for that. Thank you very much for introducing me to Bloodlust, because it really was not on my radar at all. I know next time we've got some erotica. One of them is just classic softcore porn, and the other one is your usual cinema beast style erotic horror with some Jess Franco. So, some people love that, some people don't. So until then, I really look forward to your opinions on these films anyway. But take care. I'll speak to you soon. Goodbye.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Chris. So he's a fan of Bloodlust more than... We tend to disagree with Chris on a semi-regular basis, but I don't 100% disagree with him this time. I think... like I said, none of us think Bloodlust was a bad movie. I think Chris just appreciates it a bit more than us, and it's good to hear from someone who appreciates it and to hear why they appreciate it. So nice one, Chris.
Absolutely. I respect people who can back up their opinions in some way, even if it differs to my own. And so, I mean, for example, Chris Brown, he doesn't like slashers at all, does he?
No.
And we are both big fans of them, and it's just one of those big differences. He had a bit of a go at me for liking Friday the 13th Part 2. And you bastard! Don't challenge me on Twitter, Brown. No, but seriously, starting a feud again. I don't want to do that. No, but I respect his opinion for that. I mean, his favourite non-dead related Romero film is Martin. For me personally, it would be Creepshow. What about you?
Ooh, that's interesting. Probably would be Creepshow. Yeah.
Yeah, Creepshow is really good. It's a shame it's not on this list because I'd love to talk about it at some point. But yeah, really good horror anthology. It actually made Ted Danson scary, which is a difficult thing to do. Unless he takes his wig off, then he's quite frightening indeed. But yeah, thank you very much, Chris. Always lovely to hear from you. Can't wait to hear from you on the next one, which he actually helped us out with the next one, didn't he, a bit in acquiring some obscure stuff.
Yes.
So yeah, top chap.
Absolutely.
Don't know why I said top 3 times. Now, Tom, our final bit of feedback is from 2 great friends of yours and now 2 great friends of mine. I finally made the breakthrough, Tom, that I've been waiting for all these years. We've got some feedback from Dave and Brandy Giacola, who, of course, are great friends of yours. They've been following you around for years and years, listening to all your projects and your sexy voice. I know Brandy's a fan. In particular, she likes a bit of you. And Dave probably does too. Dave probably does too. But yeah, now I have to let's play this feedback, and then afterwards I need to talk a bit about them because they've said some very sweet things recently about me. But here's the audio from Dave and Brandy, and they're talking about the Friday the 13th films. This is our previous episode where we covered that franchise. So here they are, Dave and Brandy, the Inside Out cast.
Hi, Chris and Tom.
Hello.
It's Dave and Brandy doing some feedback that we really wanted to do like 2 weeks ago for Friday the 13th. I saw it in what to me is too young of an age. I was a very sensitive child, and I'm still a sensitive person, but I was sheltered a great deal. I didn't get to watch horror movies or anything like that unless I watched them without my parents' permission at somebody else's house. Well, right after 6th grade, keep in mind I had skipped a grade, so I was a year younger than everybody else. I went to my friend's birthday party. It was a sleepover party. I do not know who thought it was a good idea to let a bunch of 12-year-olds and almost 13-year-olds, but in my case, barely 11-year-olds, watch Friday the 13th. But that's what we did, and I was absolutely traumatized because I had never seen anything like that in my life. Things that stuck with me the most from that particular movie were these scenes. The first girl who dies, who gets her throat cut in the woods. That was what let me know, oh, I'm in for it now. And then the axe to the face, and the end scenes when Mrs. Voorhees gets her head cut off, and then Jason coming up out of the water to get Alice. It's Alice, right? Alice. So it was many, many, many years before I ever watched that movie again. And I agree that by today's standards, it's just kind of meh. But at the time, it was really the front runner. It was the thing that spawned so many other things, influenced so many other things, that I have to appreciate it for that.
It's one of those movies where, yeah, there were things that came before it, like Bay of Blood, and
yes, but
I think The Burning came before it, I want to say. And
who had seen Bay of Blood, really? I mean, in America.
Yeah. It's like those bands that people are like, oh, this band's really great, and then you find out that, they were inspired by these other bands that nobody listens to.
When you think about it, everything's already been done. It's just recombining the elements in a different way.
Yeah, it's just a way to mainstream something.
So I do have a soft spot in my heart for the first Friday the 13th movie.
Even though it does introduce a character very, very late in the film.
That's a very old school mystery thing.
Right out of Agatha Christie.
Arthur Conan Doyle. Oh, here's this character we're going to introduce that has vital information that you're not going to find out about until somebody is acting very clever and revealing the whole story that they knew all along, but kept all the clues from the reader so you couldn't possibly figure it out to make the author look smarter.
Yep. Which is why Sherlock Holmes is a dick. He retains information and doesn't share it with anybody else that's investigating the crime.
I'm sorry to anyone who's an Agatha Christie or Sherlock Holmes fan. I'm sorry. But let's not waffle about. So Friday the 13th Part 2 I find really unmemorable.
You liked the bag.
I did like the bag. I thought that was very creepy. It's very easy to get a bag off a head, so you're like, are we going to have to look at that? What is that under there?
Yeah.
Am I sure I want to know?
Yeah, it would have been interesting if they kept changing what it was, but the hockey mask just became the iconic thing. The fourth installment, the final chapter, is my favorite.
I really liked that one.
The cast is amazing. I mean, you actually have a named cast in there. Mm-hmm. And Jason is a force of nature.
Oh, yes.
Ted White, who played one of the Red Guards in Tron.
Yes,
but
I can see that.
He is just vicious. And when he pins the guy up in the door frame.
I like that.
And then comes back to the house and rips him down.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah. By that point, you're wanting to see all the creative ways that Jason is going to kill somebody.
Well, even the nurse he guts in the first scene.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, by that point, we're there to see how he's going to murder everybody.
So yeah, Friday the 13th, overall, a great series. And I think the first one's still a classic, even though not all of it holds up.
I have not seen the remake because I don't hold with reboots.
Well, it's also Anchor Bay, so you're dealing with Michael Bay.
Oh, for fuck's sake!
Or Platinum Dunes. I think he owns both of those.
Either way, I don't feel any compelling need to watch that.
I've said this before, but you can't get the genie back in the bottle. You start with whatever monster, and it's scary. And then as sequels add up, it becomes comical and it becomes a bit of an anti-hero. It happened with the Nightmare on Elm Street series. It happened with Friday the 13th series. And so you start to root for Jason, and he becomes less and less scary. So when you do a reboot, you can't make him scary again.
The first film didn't have Jason in it.
No.
Except as a possible illusion.
Yep.
We're not really sure on that. And it just kind of gestated organically.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I'm glad you guys covered these films, and we love the podcast, and we love you guys, and we wish you continuing success.
Yeah.
Brandy and Dave saying, stay strange and deadly.
Strange and Deadly Show.
Great stuff. Thank you, Dave and Brandy. And before you have your little say there, Chris, I think this highlights something I did want to mention. You know, if you want to speak about films we've done in the past, because people jump on board with podcasts at different times, then that's fine. You know, if you've got a burning to talk about Brutes and Savages, then by all means, you know, send us something on that sort of thing.
Good luck to you.
Yeah. But so yeah, if you know, you don't have to be talking about the one we're covering on the show. If you want to go back an episode or go back a few episodes, that's absolutely fine too, like Dave and Brandy have. So thanks, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. brilliant feedback. I have to say, I mean, I listened to the Inside Out cast recently, and this is not to take away from what they were doing when I sort of first heard them, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. But they've become so polished, and and the dynamic between them is so great that it's such a great podcast. There's so much energy to it, and they sort of talk about whatever they want on there, and I quite like the sort of rebellious abandon of the whole thing. It's a really good show, well worth listening to. It's just very entertaining to listen to, and they were very, very kind to mention me, to give me a bit of a spotlight, which I wasn't expecting. I'm sort of used to being the silly idiot in the partnership with Tom here, and for Tom to take the accolades, and I'm quite happy for him to do that, because he's somebody I support a great deal, always have. So it's quite nice to going through a difficult time. It's quite nice to hear some really nice things being said about me. Now they did. I don't think it's the very latest episode. I think it's the previous one, the one previous to the latest. They put me on an episode about sheep, and they compared me to salt. But apart from that, it was no, I'm only joking, folks. It was a seriously moving, for me personally, shout out, where they basically, Brandy in particular, but also Dave, talked about my style on the podcast and my rant that I went on about the film Firecracker, which was the kung fu movie, quote unquote kung fu movie, that borrowed the soundtrack from Shogun Assassin. I was quite passionate about it, and that seemed to connect with Brandy, and I just want to thank them so much, because they said so many lovely things about me on there and on Twitter since then, because I've thanked them publicly as well, and it's something that I needed, and it's so lovely to hear that from them, and it really did. I sort of listened to it a few times, not for any sort of egotistical reason, but just because it was just very, very kind of them to say, and I'm so glad that they like what I'm bringing to the show. It is a 50-50 thing, and it always has to be. I've made a point of that being the case before we went into it, is that it's not going to be me being the gore boy character where I come in and I'm talking a million miles a minute and talking over Tom and taking away time from Tom, because he's 50% of it alongside me, and we make up the 100% of it together. And so for them to say that they're fans of me, and that Brandy is now a fan and would fight for me, would shank somebody for me. She didn't actually say that, but I'm assuming that's what the deal is. It is, it's just really lovely. Thank you so much, guys, and please continue to send in your feedback, because we love to hear from you.
Absolutely. To my best sort of podcasting friends in general, lovely people, and I'm glad that they've chimed in on this show, because they've chimed in the past on the Gentleman's Grindhouse very often. And always good to hear from them. But on that subject, mate, we've had a new piece of iTunes feedback, and I think it's from a chap called John Cottage, and it's very nice. And we always said we're not going to read out the feedback, but he does say Chris and his humour is one of the main reasons why I keep on listening. Of course, the subject matter is foremost, as is my previous experience listening to both Tom and Chris, but Chris is Eric Morecambe to Tom's Ernie Wise. And I find myself pissing myself in laughter every second Friday. So I'm laying to your Eric Morecambe. So
what was his name?
John Cottage.
Oh, John Cottage, covered in piss every other Friday, just sitting there listening to me. Oh, well, thank you so much. That's such a lovely thing to hear. It's a time when I don't need to have my ego plumped by any means. Plumped? I don't need to have my ego prodded. I don't need to have my ego. I'm just going to keep going for ages. No, but I it's not an egotistical thing, but it is lovely to hear when somebody likes what you're doing. And what you were doing on the Gentleman's Grindhouse with Matt, for example, was, that's something that you've got to... you've got to live up to that. I know Dave and Brandy were huge fans of yourself and Matt. Both did a fantastic job hosting together. So if I can come in and stand up to that in any way, that's great. So thank you to them, and thank you, John Cottage. That's a really lovely comment. I'll definitely pop onto iTunes later and read the whole thing. Yeah,
and just on the subject of iTunes, our listener numbers are climbing with each episode, and we appreciate that. But if you do like the show, I think the best thing you can do for us is put an iTunes review on there, because as well as listening figures, regularity of posting, it kind of makes iTunes put your show up on the list a bit more, make you a bit more noticeable. So if you do like us, we'd appreciate it if you just took a few moments to put us a review on iTunes.
Yeah, give us a rating and a review, and yeah, it really does help. You know, the more you do that, I mean, we made it to the new and noteworthy page, which was, I don't know if we're still on there. I get we're not new anymore, are we? But
well, it changes. It goes up and down, so yeah, not anymore.
Yeah, but let's think about it. Nobody thinks about the Better Sex Workout podcast anymore, do they, Tom?
No, dead in the water.
Yeah, or porn and a donut. So they don't think about that. They think about us. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Please do. You know, we love to hear from you. And indeed, if you want to send any feedback to us directly, you can do so at just email us feedback@strangeanddeadly.com. You can of course find me on Twitter at twitter.com/thegoreboy. Where can they find you, Tom?
I'm Grindhouse Tom on Twitter.
Yep, and of course you can find the Strange and Deadly Twitter. Just go to twitter.com/Strange Deadly, as we always say, no and in there. And you can go to the website, gentleman'sgrindhouserecords.com. We've got all sorts of exciting information and pictures and things on there, and artwork done by Dark Ink One, who of course does the artwork for our beautiful show. He also does the artwork for my new old show, I should say. Which is Goreboy Radio Golden Oldies, which launched a number of weeks ago. There are now 2 episodes up there.
I just want to cut you off there, Chris, for a second, because Goreboy Radio Golden Oldies is up there, and I've talked this show up a lot in the past. I think at the time there was nothing like it, and there still isn't, to be honest. I don't really listen to many other horror podcasts. I listen to one. But it was a quality piece of work. Now, there's 2 episodes out there right now, and I think it's fair to say you haven't quite hit your stride in these first 2, and I know you'll be the first to say that. But what I would say is if you've listened to it so far and thought, well, stick around for episode 3, because that's when Chris's talent really starts to show through. It is like that horror radio station we always want, you know, as horror fans. There's different sections, different segments. You know, the humour starts to come out more, and I think the first one that's up there, you were very much finding your feet, weren't you? And it happens as a podcaster. The first episode is always the one where you're sort of finding what works and what doesn't. But if you've jumped on board and thought, oh, I don't know about this, stick around for episode 3, and I think you're going to really start to love it.
Ooh, Tom, you're giving me hot flashes, man. Ooh, you're leaving me tongue-tied. No, look, I don't like anything I've done. So, yeah, you know that very well. So, yeah, I'd be the first person to criticise it. The 2008 Christmas special, I don't want to get into this because we don't want to lengthen that show, but the 2008 Christmas special was I believe, I'm not positive, I think it was the first thing I ever did. And it's just me talking for about 60 hours. Just sort of talking about stuff that I feel like talking about. Well, I thought The Dark Knight was the best film of the year. I thought that Spider-Man 2 was good, but I didn't think Spider-Man 3 was any good. Maybe they'll make Spider-Man 4, though, and get it right. I was wrong. They did. So, there are all these sorts of things on there. And the 2009 thing, I don't even know what it is. So I can't even remember anything about it. But like you say, about episode 3, I sort of found a formula that worked for me, and which was my brief doing it was I wanted to make a solo show that wasn't boring, because you listen to a lot of solo podcasts, and it really is like, hello, my name is Timothy Schmeagol, and today we're going to be talking about the Peter Jackson film Brain Dead, and it's lethargic, and it works perfectly fine. The Twilight Zone podcast has a much slower pace to it, works really well because it suits Tom's style, and the production, everything is great. So I wanted to do something that's faster paced. So yeah, if you listen to it and thought, well, this is rubbish, isn't it? You can get the fuck out. No, not really. You must sit and listen, and it gets better. Believe me, it gets better as it goes along. Yeah. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, so what are we doing next time, Chris?
Well, unfortunately, we have reached the point on this journey where we have to talk about erotic films, Tom. Now, I know, you're a bit spicy, aren't you? So this is up your street. But do you want to tell people about what's on the next episode to come in 2 weeks' time?
Well, we've got a Jess Franco film, The Erotic Rites of Frankenstein. I'm afraid so. It's true. And we also have a film by, I don't know who directs this one, but It's called The New Adventures of Snow White. I think it goes by another title as well that I can't remember off the top of my head. But it looks interesting, to say the least. So I've got a bad feeling about this one, Chris, but...
So do I. The New Adventures of Snow White, are they saying that the old Adventures of Snow White weren't erotic enough?
There was less boobs in the old Adventures of Snow White, I think.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. So those are two, I think they're both German films, but I'm not sure. No, Jess Franco, I don't know. I don't know anything, folks. I think it might be an Italian one, The Erotic Rites of Frankenstein. New Adventures of Snow White is another German film. We covered Bloodlust on this one. So yes, an erotic theme, folks. So, you know, bring your dildos and your butt plugs, and what else do people do in the bedroom, Tom?
Oh, all kinds, I don't know. I'll be podcasting naked next time. How about you?
Well, I might stick the microphone... Never mind. I will... That's it, folks. That's the end of this episode. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we will see you in another fortnight for an erotic-themed episode where we'll both be broadcasting with massive erections.
Absolutely. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.